everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Power Lunch. Today we have what I'm a presenter that I'm looking forward to. Not that I'm not for other ones, but this one is interesting from a perspective of I have customers asking me a lot about documents and how to handle documents and how to more intelligently handle documents and information around documents, and it seems to be an area of interest and confusion. So we have Mr. John Browning from HGI here to talk about that. John is an expert in the field, and he's an expert in documents too. So John, maybe tell us a little bit about yourself before you go into your presentation, but let us know a little bit about who you are, and then you can slide right into your information. And then again, just like always, this is intended to be a conversational session. So if you have questions for John, please go ahead and ask them, and we'll go from there. So John, I'll turn the floor over to you and have at it.
Sure. So, yes, my name is John Browning. I am the sales manager for our software division at HGI Technologies, and come from a background of for the last 2 decades plus dealing with document technology, and I know that oftentimes is not all that exciting to think about, but when we really dig into it, we have all sorts of technology in the IT space that is really about dealing with information. I mean, it's information technology is what the abbreviation is. And the problem we run into in a lot of cases is a lot of the information that an organization needs is trapped in that organization's documents. And so we don't have visibility to that information, and we can't get intelligence from it. And so really, we hear a lot of folks at times asking about document management and content management. And really what we are looking at is it's really about information management, regardless of whether it's currently in paper, currently in other storage methods, electronically, whatever you may be doing. Our goal is how do we make that easy to work with? From HGI Technologies perspective, we're a company that we're actually celebrating our 100th year in business this year, which is a pretty crazy thing. But we're very excited about that. And through that whole history, obviously, we have not always done software and information management in that time, but we have always been focused on how we could best help our customers to handle documents and handle their information. And so we have a long history of doing that, and are excited to continue to do that into the future. We're also a company that we're located down in sunny South Florida, have the ability to work throughout the country, obviously, but have really phenomenal reputation, whether you're looking at stuff like BBB or Net Promoter Scores, where we actually have typically maintain a Net Promoter Score higher than the Ritz, to give you an example, or higher than Costco. And then we also have a few specialty things, one of which is what's called Pros Elite, where we are rated in the top 100 service providers in our space throughout the US, and that is continually audited based upon our support metrics. So the thing is, when you're working with HGI Technologies, that you have access to the people and to experts in information management, scanning, capture, print infrastructure, whatever you may need from us. So today we're going to talk about, and I know we were very eloquent in choosing the name of our presentation, in that we called it File Shares Suck. And the thing is, they do. File shares are really, really horrific. Give me 1 second. Let me get that prezo up on screen. We should now see the HGI logo and my mouse moving.
Yep.
All right. I always like to make sure of that before we move forward any further. And I'm going to go ahead and cut my video just to save on bandwidth, and we'll go ahead and get started. So we were talking about, obviously, we know we want to store documents electronically rather than in paper because we really can't trap that information any more than sticking it on a sheet of paper or shoving that into a file cabinet or banker's box, and then hoping we know where it is at some point. That makes that really, really difficult. So we know we want to store it electronically. There's a lot of advantages to that. We can give ourselves the ability to have backup and replication, which is extraordinarily difficult in paper. We recoup floor space. When we get easier access to information, our customer satisfaction and our efficiency goes up. Our operational expenses typically go down. And that's all great. And we want to store stuff electronically more than just paper, but we can't just stop at saying electronically, because when we start to look at how do we store documents electronically, there's a lot of different options. So some of those options would be working with network or cloud file sharing platforms. Obviously, there's a ton going on in the Office 365 space with different tools for different purposes there. And then we get into what we tend to lean towards more frequently is actually really truly getting into the space of intelligent information management. But before we get into intelligent information management, let's talk a little bit about your other options. First off, file shares. And if we all raise our hands, if we've done file shares, we're all going to raise our hands. Right. So, there's a few options there. Obviously, in the local world, the predominant thing you're going to see is the Windows file share, right? Every different organization has their different your letter here drive, which is a shared file system somewhere on a server, probably, that's mapped to a particular drive letter. Or they may be doing file share with another OS. There are other things than Windows out there. Maybe NAS or SAN, any number of things that are doing those local file shares, but in general, they're all pretty basic. And we'll talk about that. And then obviously, in more recent history, we've gotten a lot of cloud offerings, and I don't have room on the screen to list them all. There's Box, there's Google Drive, there's Ignite, there's so many others. And I hope I'm not insulting anyone that I didn't list the one you may use. They're all out there. I just don't have space for them, but they all tend to follow a lot of the same rules. And so what we tend to see in those is that whichever platform you're using, whether local or cloud, it typically has the same problem. And that is, we are storing those documents based upon what a human chooses as far as where to store them and what to name them. And of course, we all in the technology space will tend to say, well, hey, I can come up with a great folder storage convention and naming convention, and it'll be organized and we'll be able to find stuff. And there's a few problems there. One, a lot of times our technology-based minds don't really work well with our users and what their needs are. Or even worse, we're all aware that if we have a human choosing or a human responsible for following a process that we have conceived, that process is going to fail because humans don't follow rules real well. So what we wind up with is what I tend to call the digital landfill. Okay. Which means I don't name it the same way Keith would name it. He doesn't put it in the same folder Piper would put it. And we wind up with documents that are lost. We wind up with documents that are duplicated, triplicated, quadruplicated, if that's a word. And it's really difficult not only to find the information that we need, but which of those documents, which of those files is the actual real document from a business standpoint versus what is an out of date or duplicate that doesn't contain all the current information. Okay. On top of that, your file sharing platforms typically have little to no capabilities for workflow automation or retention management. And they're also really difficult to secure and audit access. Now, don't get me wrong, you're going to see these platforms say they do these things, and some may do better in certain areas than others. But for any of us who have, let's go back to the lowest common denominator, who's tried to set up granular security on Windows folders? It is painful. What about Audit Trail or various other tools like that? It's really, really hard to deploy. There are functions to do it, but the feasibility becomes really a non-starter. So what other choices then do we have? Well, one of the most popular that we see is from our friends in Redmond, is Office 360. And so we're going to see tools in O365 like OneDrive and SharePoint, Teams, Outlook. Obviously, Teams and Outlook are lesser players in the space of storing information. For example, Teams has some capability to do workflows and those sorts of things, but we tend to see that people aren't really geared up to store their information in Teams, and there's reasons why. OneDrive is great for backing up your local storage and giving you accessibility to what's on your desktop or laptop on other devices or in other areas, but it's difficult to share files and share access to information to other folks within the organization. We all, I think, probably agree that we really don't want our users, even though Outlook still tends to be used tremendously for storing documents and information, we really don't want them doing that. And it's not a good choice. And that leaves us with SharePoint. And SharePoint really is used and can be used well for shared storage. So let's get into SharePoint a little bit. Obviously, one of the things we get with SharePoint is we bring in a lot of tools that we don't have typically in a file share type platform, like the ability to share files, choose who has accessibility, permissioning. We can set up workflows and approval processes, and we have searchability within that tool. However, there's always a but, right? There are lots of tools, but we see that with SharePoint, what you're really looking at in a lot of ways, if you'll work with me on the analogy, is it is akin to working with a delivery of lumber and pipes and cabling and fasteners and flooring and siding and roofing, but you have to build the house. And so what you have is you have all of the tools, but there's really a huge effort required to deploy SharePoint, especially if you want to deploy SharePoint in what is defined by Microsoft as the correct way for storing information and documents. So again, we can go with a real quick show of hands for those who are using SharePoint for storing documents and sharing documents. Are we using folders within that? Yay, nay. We tend to see still a lot of folders within SharePoint, at which point we've just turned it into a cloud-based file sharing, the same as what we were just talking about with the same kinds of problems. And the way SharePoint is designed to be deployed for storing documents is utilizing their content model, where we define content types and define characteristics of content that is going to be stored within it. And then we don't use folders. Instead, we use columns, which I will, for the first time today, say the magic word of metadata, right? So we use, in SharePoint, they call metadata columns, which is fine. But this gives us much more granular levels of search and a lot more to do. However, when we set SharePoint up correctly, it tends to be a longer, more difficult configuration than going with an off-the-shelf information management product, because of how it is required to be set up, and because of the fact that SharePoint in a lot of ways is a toolkit that you have to build out to do what you want. The other thing is a lot of the functionality within SharePoint, especially as we have moved into cloud-based versus on-prem, we used to be able to just simply do custom programming to get what we wanted out of SharePoint. That's no longer out there because we can't inject custom code into cloud-based SharePoint, right? So we have to now use the tools. And what we see in a lot of cases is that people are looking at third-party tools to get past limitations in SharePoint for stuff like retention management and security and audit and search and workflow and capture, because that's one of the biggest glaring issues with SharePoint is the difficulty of getting documents into SharePoint. And so, if you have a SharePoint implementation that you want to stay with, we have ways to leverage tools to make a lot of those things better, without requiring customization or whatnot, and still allowing you to work within SharePoint if that's where you want to be. However, we also see a lot of folks that have gone down that road and maybe want to go in a different direction, and we have ways to help there as well. And that's where we get into intelligent information management. And in full disclosure, we are a reseller and service provider for mFiles. And what mFiles does, and intelligent information management as a whole, is it lets us utilize metadata to work with any process, any repository, whatever application, whatever information, and however you're already deployed. And the way we do that is we start with one key concept. We move from storing a document based upon where it is to storing documents and information based on what it is. So instead of it's going to be in this this folder share with this storage convention and this naming convention, instead, when a document comes in, we ask, what is it? And based upon what is it, we know, okay, we maybe need customer date and authorization for that type of document, and we configure those and can do that. So, whoops, sorry, hit the mouse the wrong way. There we go. So, with taking the where out of the picture, you really wind up that whether it's an agreement document, an invoice, customer data, a workflow state, we can find what we want just by knowing what it is. And we also want all of our employees to have a common way to find the information they need, regardless of what time it is, where they are, what system they're on. And so we do a lot of things to improve how the productivity of the business and how they can get to that information by getting rid of the frustration of not being able to find the relevant information they need. So that's where we go with mFiles. We also then bring not only that concept of where it is versus what it is, we now also give one access point to all of an organization's information. So I said earlier, it's okay if you're already utilizing SharePoint or file shares, document management systems, Google Drive, whatever the case. We can make all of that available within the mFiles interface, and that mFiles interface is available whether you're on a computer, a tablet, a mobile device, web. We don't care. You have access to it. And obviously, that's the generalization. Obviously, there may be security concerns and whatnot, and you can choose what you actually allow, but we have the capability to do all of that.
John, can I interrupt you for a minute?
You sure can. Go ahead.
Conversational. So am I understanding it correctly that you can, for lack of a better word, integrate a tool like mFiles into Teams or into like a workflow in Teams or those types of things, so it can be used in conjunction with those applications?
It absolutely can. And so what we can actually do is, I mentioned earlier, a lot of folks don't like storing data into Teams because maybe the comfort zone's not there, just the methodology is difficult. We can now take information, put it into mFiles, and then make that available in Teams or in Outlook, various other places.
John, is mFiles like an interface into your existing platform of choice, and it does some kind of organizing of where everything is, or is it actually where you're storing the documents?
Yes and yes. So that's really the beauty. And as we get further into it, we'll talk about some of that. We have the choice of, do we migrate data or not? with mFiles. So mFiles is its own intelligent information management platform. And obviously anything new we would ideally put into mFiles because it's easier to deal with, it's structured, we eliminate the human portion of that equation where people don't follow rules because the system forces them to follow the rules. However, if we have an existing SharePoint library, if we have an existing file folder, or we have an existing document management system that maybe we don't like, we can make all of those available and searchable from mFiles. So mFiles is still the one point of access for our teams.
So if
And
we
then
have
on the flip side, I'm sorry, go ahead.
So if we have multiple storage options, it can bring it all together in one interface.
Right, and give you searchability across all of those silos, essentially eliminating the silos.
Right.
And then the third piece of what it does is it then allows that information to show up in applications like Teams or Outlook, Google, etc., in your G Suite stuff. So it kind of is doing all of these different things, has the capability to do all of those different things based upon the need of the client organization.
I don't mean to interrupt again, but so that I was looking at your screen here. So can you use mFiles as a, I'm just going to say repository as a general placeholder, as a tool, I'll say tool that interfaces with Teams and maybe Microsoft Dynamics. If you have Dynamics, it can serve as the basically document management for both of those even though they're kind of like cousins, right?
Yeah.
But Dynamics is one thing, Teams is another. You can use it for both.
You have the capability to do both things.
Oh,
yes.
Interesting.
So,
okay.
I mean, it can really become a powerful thing and break down. And that's one of their focuses and why they call it an information management. It's not just documents. So like in your example, Keith, we may have teams where we're doing collaboration and some workflows and that sort of stuff, but we have to go outside of Teams to go get the data we need, the documents we need, the information we need. We can eliminate that. On the flip side, we may be using Dynamics as an accounts payable system, but we still have to store the invoices and supporting documentation and those sorts of things. We can do that with mFiles. So it's a very versatile platform. And then we start to really get into crazy stuff because, I mean, we're also talking about stuff like OnBase and Laserfish and other content management systems or document management systems. One of the things that really is unique about mFiles in that space is it doesn't have to be a document. Again, we're storing information. So if it's just a matter of, in the Dynamics example, that we want to replicate and make available all of our customer data from Dynamics and make that, say, available to our sales team so that they can make calls with the information from Dynamics without actually having to get Dynamics licensing for our sales team and or having security or permissions issues with our sales team having access to accounting. We can do that. We actually utilize mFiles internally at HGI and store a tremendous amount of content regarding to customers and prospects and essentially have set up a CRM which runs within mFiles. But again, one of the examples here you see probably is not SharePoint, is Salesforce. So we can integrate there as well. So it's a very versatile platform. It really comes down to what is it that you want to accomplish, and then we can dig in to make that happen. But yes, it's a silo breaker.
So is this something that you have, like, people are continuously using Teams, they're still using the app, is it constantly pulling from that? So even though people are, say, still uploading things to those other apps, they would just come into mFiles and show up there?
Right. So what we're looking at there is, again, it's going to vary depending upon how the implementation is set up. But typically what we would look at is, ideally when we put the documents away, we're going to do it through an mFiles interface, but then those documents are available so that in Teams I can send, hey, would you take a look at this invoice? And I don't want to use the word attach per se, but I can leverage documents, an invoice document that may be in mFiles, and send that along with my Teams message. And we can, this is a phenomenal discussion. I did not really come in with the presentation today from a standpoint of focusing it on Office 365 and that all those integrations, but we could certainly do a follow-up if that's of interest, that is tailored into Office 365 and maybe even as a secondary or as even a separate presentation. Not everyone's on Office 365. What if they're in G Suite? How do we do it there?
Right. Yeah, I think a drill down session is a good idea that we should contemplate doing. But yeah, I didn't mean to derail you, so keep going.
It's certainly not a derail. It's an area of importance that people want to know about. But I also know it's a power lunch, which means we ought to be not
Right.
coming out of it exhausted. So I didn't try to do a 2-hour prezo today.
Right. No, it's great information. Yeah, keep going. Like I said, I want us to be able to see the whole thing here, so we can talk about that, doing the follow-up.
Absolutely. I love and I completely understand there's going to be stuff in the conversation today that's not in the slide deck, and that's great because that tells us where we need to go. And I think we may have just set a record for the youngest Power Lunch attendee in history. So
she's been very enthusiastic about the whole thing.
well, she's all about information management. She doesn't want to have to be dealing with this stuff when she's in the workforce.
Right. She just
So,
wants to make it better until she gets there.
Very good. So, digging into, yes, we can tie into all these different systems and make them better. Another area where we're going to have some difference from, your file shares and other platforms is that based on that, what it is, information or metadata, we can also then apply permissions and security based on that information. And it can be based on multiple properties. So it may be that based on both location and what portion of the team you're in is how you get access to certain pieces of info. So it gives you the ability to set that up so that it applies automatically but still gets very, very granular. And oh, by the way, we also have the ability to give a full audit trail if that is desired, so that we know who touched what did they do with it, all of that depending upon the needs. That again is very difficult to do in a lot of other platforms. We also have workflow. And when we talk about workflow, this is a very simple example of a workflow. We have some of these that look like a bowl of spaghetti. And it's not because we try to make it complex. It's that businesses have complex workflows and we have to be able to support that. So one of the things we love about mFiles is very frequently the question is not yes or no, can we do it? It is which way would you like to? And that's something that we have in workflow. We don't come in and say, this is the way you're going to run your business. We say, how do you run your business? And we set up the software to work within that. So we have the ability now to have automated rules-based workflows to streamline your business process and make sure nothing gets lost in the cracks. Now, this is an example of what would be an automated rules-based workflow, but we also have the ability to do ad hoc. If I just need to send something to Keith and say, hey, take a look at this, I can do that from within the mFiles interface. Or again, we have the integration into other platforms and can do it there as well. So a lot of versatility again. We talked about the ability to link to a lot of other information repositories. That gives us the ability that migration is not necessarily required with mFiles, because from the mFiles interface, I can have visibility to file folders. I can have visibility to SharePoint. I can have visibility to a box repository that we may have. And I bring a lot of the benefits of mFiles from a search standpoint into play with those. So I can leave it where it is, or I can migrate it to mFiles, and we can make that on a case-by-case determination. But we don't necessarily have to look at everything has to be ripped and replaced, which makes it much more palatable when an organization is looking at doing these sorts of things. One other thing that mFiles brings to the table, and this comes back to, say a comparison versus SharePoint, where SharePoint, everything pretty much has to be built from the toolkit. We have templates and best practices for a lot of different processes that are already put in place with mFiles so that we can rapidly deploy these solutions and get them up and running for you. Even though they are there, those can still be customized as well. I shouldn't say customized, they can be configured, because we're typically not writing code. It's just, how are we going to configure the tool to work? So that is it for our power lunch today. I'm at 25 minutes or so, and I wanted to leave some time for Q&A or any of that, and also just not to overburden anyone and have them feel like they ate too much. So I will open the floor up to questions and be happy to answer any I
I have
can.
more of just like a general comment, I guess. I kind of like the fact that you don't have to rip and replace. You can keep
Absolutely.
your current systems in place, and this can become a conduit into what you're using, or you can do a rip and replace, it sounds like.
Yes.
So that exact statement leads me to a question of, so if I have, and I'm just going to use the term document repositories, whatever. So if I have, let's say, pools of document information, let's say maybe I have a legacy system, let's say maybe I have Box or something in the cloud, can I use mFiles to manage that information? Can that sit on top of that and be what I would call a normalization layer between those pools of information and maybe my Teams implementation or some other tool? Can I use that as the normalization between all of that?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, one of the things I think that mFiles really comes down to, and again, you know me, I tend to use highly technical terms, but it's a silo breaker. Where we're so used to seeing a silo of information, a silo of information, a silo of information, and never between shall information pass, it breaks that down. And now we have the ability, without having to do massive migration, and because it's really painful and really expensive to do. Instead, here's Box, make it show up in mFiles. Here's File Share, make it show up in mFiles. Here's SharePoint, make it show up in mFiles. Done. Easy, easy, easy.
And I'm assuming this can be some kind of like hybrid, in the fact we start out with mFiles as the conduit, and somewhere we can start migrating in, and it'll be seamless to people. They won't even know.
Yeah, there's a terminology we use in the mFiles word. It's called promoting. So we can choose to promote a piece of information from, say, the file share it was in to mFiles. And basically all that requires is, take maybe this contract and then start to identify it in mFiles. This is a contract. Oh, you want the other party and the date and the signatory. Okay, no problem. You populate those pieces of metadata as you promote. And now you bring even more benefits into play, because now we've moved that document or promoted that document fully into mFiles instead of in the old place.
And it has the ability to grab that metadata from the document, for example.
There are some capabilities for that.
Yeah, like I wouldn't expect it to read a signature necessarily, but like if it's a contract and everything's static, I would assume, does it have the ability to map out a field and say, city, just as an example, city, state, and zip type thing?
We have ways to do that. Absolutely. Some are within mFiles, some are other capture tools. And again, it just depends upon what your goals are, but yes.
Right. So what's the best way? So how do I say that? So how do you think about, or how does mFiles contemplate data ingestion? So I would say the conversion from one media to another, from a physical media to electronic. I mean, how does that best work? I would assume that you don't just take a picture with your cell phone and put it in mFiles.
Right.
What's the just high level?
So we're talking paper
to electronic.
Yes. So, I mean, when we're talking paper, step one is there's got to be a picture taken of it. And I know you jokingly mentioned your cell phone. Those can be used. We would highly recommend. There's some apps we can recommend that, essentially effectively turn your cell phone into a scanner. and give you where it'll crop the page and deskew it and make it look nice. At which point that can be ingested. We typically would certainly not want just a straight picture, because then it's hard to handle down the line. And obviously cell phone's not real efficient if you've got to do a lot. So one of the areas that we have a lot of expertise in, there's not a one size fits all answer to how do we get paper into M files. It depends upon what you've got and where it is now and how it's stored now and how it's organized and what your goals are. I can give a few examples though. Some may be, we're going to do a back file conversion, and depending upon the size, we may do that in-house or we may outsource that. And that's going to involve taking all these paper documents and scanning them, because we've got to have the image to get the data out of them. At that point, we may run it through various different recognition technologies to get the metadata that is desired out of those documents. Back file conversion tends to be expensive. And that's why in a lot of cases we try to avoid them. So we may look at, okay, for this particular client, what is it specifically that you're trying to accomplish? And maybe they've got a few file cabinets of contracts that they want to digitize and store into the system. Okay, great. Do you have retention periods on those, first and foremost? And if say it's a 3-year retention period from date of expiration, one of the things we would tend to recommend at that point is, can we just start day forward and let the paper fall off by expiration? And thus we never have to touch the back file. We never have that expense. We just start with today forward, and after X number of years, the paper's gone. So that's one strategy we look at. We may also look at day forward plus a on-demand scanning, or if there's a need, maybe we need to recover the space. Maybe there's some urgent need to have better access for customer service or efficiency gains. And then typically those are then going to start to drive an ROI to make the move into doing that back file conversion. And then we have the ability to help with choosing the right scanners, and that's important. Which scanners you choose is very important in that process, and what the work process looks like. One of the things I've been lucky enough in my work history to have experience in is not just on the software side, but also in the scanning side. So I worked for a company that supported a lot of scanning service bureaus, and became very familiar with the ergonomics of that kind of process and how you structure getting that done and what tools you need. That can be a whole additional discussion, because it's more than a scanner and software. It's how do you organize your workers? What kind of workspace do you give them? Did you know there are tools specifically for aligning and removing static from pages so they'll efficiently go through the scanner? How do you deal with document prep and removing staples and paper clips and unfolding? And those are all things we consult with our clients on when we get into those kinds of things. And it's a whole nother world that typically in the IT space we don't have experience with, because we don't deal with paper that much.
Yeah, we don't deal with paper.
So, that's again one of the benefits of my personal experience and our company's experience of dealing with those kinds of scenarios and being able to bring that expertise and provide it for our clients.
I have another question, but first I'll throw it out to the floor. Does anybody else have any questions for John? Hearing nothing, I'm going to ask my question, which is, how about permissions? Can it pull permissions over from like Active Directory, or do you have to build permissions to access documents within the app itself?
So yes and no. Yes, we can pull users and groups and whatnot from Active Directory, as well as a lot of other directory platforms.
Yeah, right.
But typically what we don't find is that the Active Directory is not fine-tuned enough to be the only basis for permissioning within our information management system. So we'll tend to bring users and groups, but then we will have to further define those permissions and can do so in M-Files in the administrative console very easily. But typically speaking, the AD is not well enough organized to be the only source.
Right. The other question I had is around security. And I would assume that this tool is able to be used in like a HIPAA environment and those types of things. And just from a high level, because I know we could probably do a deep dive on it, but is it
Sure.
able to be used in a HIPAA environment or a PCI type environment as well?
Able and is. So there's a tremendous amount of like we mentioned briefly, security and audit trail. There's a lot of white papers and research on application, and there's a lot of customers that are already using it in those scenarios. So that definitely gives you the ability to support those kinds of environments.
All right, one more is M-Files, is that an enterprise class tool like for large business, or would you say it's medium size, or what kind of is the sweet spot for size of business that M-Files would be deployed in?
Well, the cool thing with M-Files is it does, again, this is back to the how would you like to do it. It can easily support enterprise class clients.
So it scales.
However, I'm sorry?
It scales
Very easily. However, it's also available and affordable for small businesses and anywhere in between. So, the limitation on M-Files is you've got to buy at least 5 licenses.
Is the license, how is it, what is a license? An input or a user? What is a license?
Licenses are per user, and we typically prefer to use named licenses. There is a concurrent license, but you also then run into issues like any concurrent license of users leaving sessions open and tying up licenses and that sort of stuff. So named licenses are typically a better way to go. And of course, they're at a significant discount over concurrent. So it typically makes sense anyway.
It's also better to get security in line.
I'm sorry, what was that?
If you have a concurrent license, doesn't that alter your security model maybe? As opposed to
not
individual?
really, because you still
Tracking?
identify every user. Just
Okay.
concurrent is how many can be in the system at any one time.
Gotcha.
But again, what you wind up with is if I leave my M-File session open, for very good reasons, we don't automatically close those, because I may have a document open and checked out that I'm editing, and we don't want to close it and lose those changes. So that's where named licenses tend to be much more beneficial. But yeah, so does that answer your question about licenses, Keith? As far as there's, like any of these platforms, there's different flavors of licensing. They have 4 different packages: core, standard, pro, enterprise, which of course come with differing price points. But the licensing is done in that manner, and it's a term-based license. So the differentiation, of course, versus subscription is term you're purchasing for a year up front,
Right.
versus a monthly spend.
One last question, I guess. Is it, so talk about cloud versus on-premise. Is it both? Is it cloud? Is it on-premise? Is there a appliance required? Can it be virtualized? Just kind of at a high level. I know we could rabbit trail that, but just in a high level, how is it?
Right. Well, Keith just made this become power dinner.
Yeah, right. I know. Like I said, from a high level,
I'll keep it short and sweet. No problem. So yes, and again, we're back to which way would you like to do it. So M-Files can be deployed on-premise, can be deployed cloud, and can be deployed hybrid. So you have all of your options open and available. It can be deployed to an actual physical server. It can be deployed to virtualized servers. And again, it can be deployed cloud, where you don't have to deal with any servers. The beautiful thing is a license is a license, and that is for cloud, on-prem, or hybrid. So whatever you choose to do, if your needs change down the road, no problem, migrate. and you can come from one to the other. Obviously, cloud has the typical cloud benefits. You don't have to
Right.
deal with infrastructure. You don't have to deal with backups or updates or any of that stuff. It just rolls out. Does that
No,
answer all of them,
yeah,
or was
no,
there
that was
more
good. No,
there that I didn't cover?
nope, that answered the question. I think that, as we said earlier, I think that it would be great to do another session or do a little bit of a deeper dive and maybe focus on some of the areas that we talked about.
Sure.
Before we go, does anybody have any other questions?
No, I don't.
All right. If not, no, like I said, I think that we'll reach out, we'll figure out another time and get you back in if we can and talk a little bit in more detail about some of these things, because yeah, my head's kind of spinning a little bit on some of
Absolutely.
these, but in a good way.
It's really a huge subject.
It really is. And you don't really
you
think
know,
about it that way, but actually it really is.
it really is a major undertaking.
Yep.
And we try to make that as easy as we can. I would encourage for anyone that is either on the call now, or if you're watching the recording later, if you have other questions, feel free to reach out to us and we'll be happy to help answer those for you.
Yep. If anybody has questions, feel free to shoot me an email and I'll get you in touch with John and we talk about it and get your questions answered. Because like you said, it's kind of, when you think about it, it doesn't seem like I'm just going to scan in documents. Well, that's really the tip, the pointy, very tip of the iceberg, because there's a lot around that and there's a lot to think about. And this seems like a great tool, especially the multi-source capabilities, where if you have these silos, like you said, it breaks the silos.
Absolutely.
So
and one
very
thing,
interesting.
if I may add, Keith,
Mhm.
as you mentioned, a lot of times we're like, hey, I'll just start scanning. Please don't start without a plan. Because once you start scanning, I've had too many clients that I've worked with that have wound up having to go back and do work over because they really regretted the way that their non-planned conversion happened.
Yeah, they missed the mark on some stuff. So no, very good. Well, with no other questions, John, thank you very much for your time. It was a super informative session. And like I said, it just like with a couple of our storage sessions, this one is going to grow into a couple of additional shows so that we can talk in more detail. But this was very good, very informative. Really appreciate your time.